All right, I believe I'm going to point at the right camera this time, Trevi. We are live, back from Detroit, with the finals. The finals, Trevi. We've had 8 long rounds, and we are down to the final 2 players. We are ready to find out which Tyranid flavor reigns supreme this weekend.
Absolutely. Get those engines revving, boys and girls and people of all persuasions, in the chat for the top 2 game of the Motor City Mayhem 2022. We're going to see which of these 2 Tyranid pilots can drive their army to victory today. And I, personally, I'm definitely biased, and I think Chad has been calling me out all weekend about this game because I'm personally very interested to see which of these 2 Tyranid archetypes comes out on top, because we are playing 2 very different Tyranid lists against one another, and
for those of us who are xenophobic, we might not be able to tell the difference between the biomass devouring swarm in front of us. But you assure me that these are 2 very different lists.
I swear to you, despite the fact that they all might look the same, these are different units on the different sides of the table.
All right. So players are starting to deploy. So we're going to pop to our overhead. And Trevi, why don't you take us through what we have in store today?
Absolutely. Let's take a quick look-see here at the exact army lists that are being played. We've actually we've seen Joel Wilson's army on stream over this weekend twice so far. He's been on the main camera, although we have seen him over on our sister stream here over on War Games Live several times. He did play in the semifinals round as well as against Nick Donavani, I believe, yesterday in a very close game. So we have here Joel Wilson playing on the bottom left side of the table. What's our mission today, by the way? Or
so we were playing Death and Zeal.
Death and Zeal. So very similar layout to our semifinals game as well, which was on conversion. Objective is going to be in the same position. But Joel Wilson, bottom left-hand side, we did see him on stream in the semifinal round. This time he is bringing a battalion detachment out of High Fleet Leviathan. We've talked at length about his list. It is going to be focused on the power of those Maleceptors in the current iteration of Tyranids, although I will reiterate for people who are just tuning in for the finals game that we are playing pre-FAQ rules. The FAQ did come out basically almost in line with the first round pairings for this tournament, so it was well after the rules lock for the event. So we are not using the new Tyranid nerfs that came out on Friday. That means that these Maleceptors are going to be full power, and we could potentially be casting 4 spells with the Maleceptors between a combination of their own 2 casts, Power of the Hive Mind to get an additional cast, plus the Psychic Oversight to allow them to perform their psychic action, as well as their psychic powers to trigger their psychic overload 4 times to deal a grand total of 12 mortal wounds in addition to the damage that their powers are doing innately. Joel is going to be using the power of these the raw unchecked power of these Maleceptors in addition to their raw defensive efficient defensive profile to try to win out in an attritional game. He's playing a 1 battalion detachment, bringing a Hive Tyrant with direct guidance and the Reaper of Obliterax. That is a foot Hive Tyrant. We're not seeing the winged version in this list today, so the slow ground poundy boy is bringing his big 3-shot 4 damage gun with that heavy venom cannon and very powerful melee profile with that Reaper of Obliterax relic, as well as a little bit of support from that guy. On top of that, using that direct guidance to give a core unit +1 to hit. We also have a Neurothrope upgraded with the Resonance Barb for an additional +1 to cast, and Synaptic Tendrils to give 2 units Warp Siphon to allow them to roll 3d6 to cast their spells and drop 1 of the Tyranid player's choice. We have 3 bricks of Tyranid Warriors, 2 of 3, 1 with a Venom Cannon, 1 of 6 with 2 Venom Cannons, and we've seen Joel use that to great effect as a concentrated focal point for all of his defensive abilities, give those guys an invulnerable save as well as a damage ignore roll on top of the -1 damage and the transhuman effect that Tyranid Warriors can have to make them very difficult to kill and give a lot of objective secured presence to that center objective so that Joel can have the best chance to score his primary objective points. We also have, out of the elite slot, a little bit more objective control in Death Leaper, who's been upgraded with her Warlord trait, Alien Cunning, so she counts as 5 models and objective secured for holding objectives. Again, we don't have a ton of objective secured in a High Fleet Leviathan list, but we do have just enough, essentially, to be able to try to wrest control of that middle objective from the list's opponent. We also have a unit of Venom Thropes to protect the list, as well as a unit of Zoanthropes for essentially the same reason. And those are backing up those 3 Maleceptors that we can see deploying right on the front of the line here at the edge of Joel's deployment zone. Those 3 6-brained big stabby boys.
I just want to make sure chat understands. If you were not on our stream last round, if you perhaps are just joining us for the finals, or you were on the World Games live stream checking out that Tyranid mirror that was over there, there's a reason that we have a mortal wound counter on our screen right now.
Yes.
We finished the last game with an absurd but perfect number of mortal wounds, 69.
The very sexy number.
It's almost as sexy as these Blazers, Trevi. Almost. That was a great bit of hilarity in the game that kind of got put away at the end, but I do not expect that the number of mortal wounds is going to be insignificant in this game with 3 Maleceptors.
No. Now, here's the question for you, Lyle, and I guess for the chat as well. Should we be counting the mortal wounds for both players? Because we will have a not insignificant amount of mortal wounds be coming out of the Hive Fleet Kraken army as well.
We can definitely create a dueling mortal wounds counter.
Yes.
We can set that up for
Incredible.
you, chat. Absolutely.
So backing that up, last but certainly not least, we have a lot of frontline firepower and a lot of resilience in this Tyranid army so far for Joel, but that is backed up by some insane shooting. And that is also, on top of that, going to be using the Hive Fleet Leviathan adaptive trait to reroll a single hit roll for each unit that attacks. That means that Joel is going to be trying to take a lot of little individual shots to make that single hit roll go as far as he can. So in order to support that, we have 3 Carnifexes, all of them with those heavy venom cannons. So if we're keeping track, we have 3 Carnifex heavy venom cannons, all of them get a reroll. We have the Hive Tyrant heavy venom cannon, that's another reroll, all those big 4 damage guns, and then we have a Harpy upgraded with heavy venom cannons and synaptic enhancement. So not only is it going to get the Hive Fleet Leviathan transhuman effect, but it's also going to get the synaptic imperatives anywhere on the table. It doesn't necessarily have to be next to this Tyranid synapse creature. That brings the total of heavy venom cannons up to 6 for this army. So an army focused on these big Maleceptors and doing mortal wounds with magic psychic laser beams is also going to be putting out significant hurt in the shooting phase. Now, the reason that these heavy venom cannons are particularly important in this particular matchup against Charlie Andre is that we see a Hive Fleet Kraken list here from Charlie. We've been streaming Hive Fleet Leviathan all weekend, but we are going to see an entirely different flavor of Tyranids up against the Maleceptors today. Hive Fleet Kraken, for those who don't know, has the benefit of rolling D3 plus 3 for its advance rolls instead of the normal D6. And because, unlike a lot of factions, Tyranids can make the best use of their advance rolls because of the Onslaught Psychic Power. They can have that Psychic Power be cast with high reliability from a Neurothrope sitting in the back of the table, use the Synaptic Link to chain that Psychic Power all the way across all of the Synapse creatures in the army, and then get it to a forward-positioned unit. That allows them to advance and ignore the advance and shoot penalty, so they can get additional threat range on their ranged attacks, and they can advance and charge, meaning that they're going to have an additional D3 plus 3 threat range over most other armies in the game. Now, on top of that, obviously the Hive Fleet Leviathan also has the ability to advance and charge, not using that D3 plus 3 advance, just a normal D6, but you also have access to the stratagem Opportunistic Advance, which replaces your advance roll, which would be, for a Kraken unit between 4 and 6, with a flat 8 inches. So they can essentially advance automatic 6 with +2, then advance and charge. And if you stack that with units that are already relatively fast, Charlie Andre's army is going to be rocketing across this table, and the big benefit that he has here over the Hive Fleet Leviathan list, although his list does a little bit less damage and is a little bit less resilient without that transhuman effect, the upside is that it has a monumental advantage in threat range and is going to be able to alpha strike Joel Wilson's list if he's able to set that up. Now, in this list, we do have a Neurothrope upgraded with the Resonance Barb and Synaptic Tendrils. That's a combo that we're going to see time and time again in Tyranid lists, like we just talked about. We do have one Winged Hive Tyrant, that one also bringing the Reaper of Obliterax and Adaptive Biology for a 5+ damage ignore. So he's going to essentially be able to ignore about 30% of the wounds that are going into him. We also have, in the troops allotment, have a reasonable number of objective secured units between 1 unit of Gargoyles as well as a unit of Hormigons. Hormagaunts. The Hormagaunts are a very effective offensive objective secured unit because they can use the bounding leap stratagem to get automatic access to advance and charge without the need for onslaught, and automatically get a 6 on their advance instead of having to roll for it. So these guys can threat 16 plus their normal advance. Unfortunately, those two don't combo together with opportunistic advance. So they are capped to a 16-inch if they want to use that Hormagon stratagem, but it allows them to springboard onto enemy objectives from a relatively long way away.
I do want to say, as a non-Tyranid player, Trevi, it's nice seeing the Gaunts make an appearance.
I know. They're not a unit that have been seen much, especially since the advent of Crusher Stampede in the previous version, where the Army of Renown disallowed the use of one wound models entirely, and now we are going to see a couple of them start trickling back in. We also have a small unit of Tyranid warriors in that detachment. Another inclusion of Death Leaper, so a lot of Death Leaper play happening at this tournament today. 2 Maliceptors in that detachment, so not the full 3. And to be clear as well.
2's still a lot.
2's still a lot. 2's still more than most of the armies that we've seen on stream over the weekend. But the downside here for Highfleet Kraken, while the Maliceptors can advance and cast psychic powers, meaning they can make use of that additional advance distance from Highfleet Kraken, and opportunistic advance to move a total of 16 inches before they start casting their spells. So the Highfleet Kraken Maliceptors have the advantage of being able to reach the Highfleet Leviathan Maliceptors from 2 inches farther out.
Okay.
The downside is that they don't have access to Hive Nexus, which means they never have access to both Synaptic Imperatives at once.
Right.
The full combo requires, in order to get your 7+ to cast, +1 to cast from the Neurotrope Synaptic Imperative, and cast spells and actions from the Maliceptor Imperative, and Highfleet Kraken Maliceptors will never get that. So there's definitely a trade-off between those two. Now we have a unit of Tyrant Guard to protect the Hive Tyrants in this detachment, 1 unit of Zoanthropes to get access to their Imperative, which is important because we have a ton of infantry in this list. That is going to be a total of 5 units of Raveners, so 15 total Raveners, all of them with chest-mounted Death Spitters and Rending Claws. That's going to bring them to a monumental AP4, I believe. Makes them very good at opening tin cans like Space Marines, even through that Armor of Contempt. The downside there, obviously, being that against a Highfleet Leviathan list, a lot of the front line is going to be protected by invulnerable saves, so that extra armor penetration value, not going to be that big of a deal. Now, we also have the Death Spitters in those guys, so they're going to be able to put out an appreciable amount of shooting. But the big benefit here is that Raveners have a base move of 12 inches, meaning that in addition to opportunistic advance, they can move 20 inches and then charge using Onslaught.
You know, we were talking last round about how the one advantage that our Harlequins player had to exploit was the inherent speed, slowness of the large Tyranid models. They're trying to zip around, move, block, do things. It doesn't sound like you're describing a very slow list here. It doesn't sound like there's much of a weakness from on a speed angle for this list.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about that in the previous game, where the downside of the monster-focused list is it doesn't focus a lot on infantry. It does get stopped by, 3-dimensional terrain, things like walls and buildings that the monsters cannot move through, whereas the infantry can go through thanks to that breachable keyword. And a lot of it's just, it's not super slow. There are certainly armies that are, like Death Guard or Deathwing or something like that have very low base speed values. It's all move 8, but it doesn't have that many movement benefits. The upside here, the alternative here is to play Highfleet Kraken if you want to be able to project that threat range, and basically just use these Raveners as peace trading options. They can move out, they can advance and shoot without penalty with their weapons. You can buff them up with rerolls to hit. Go in there, attack 15 times with the Death Spitters, and then 25 times with those big AP4 Rending Claws, probably tear something down, use potentially Encircle the Prey or Overrun on that unit itself to get it into an annoying place or pull it out of danger, and just sort of continue to keep up on the peace trade that way.
All right, now we do see tape measure out. We have found out that Joel, our triple Maliceptor player, is going first on turn 1. All right, we'll get our table mic going as well. All right, so the 1 Harpy and the 3 Maliceptors ready to start shambling forth and doing things that they like to do. I don't know, shambling's a good word. I don't know. Our table boss is shaking his head at me. Yeah. Okay. All right, we do have. I did want to take a moment and chat. We're getting weird computer stuff. I saw some people in our YouTube chat. We are multi-streaming to YouTube and Twitch right now. Did see a few of our YouTube viewers asking or doing exclamation point lists, trying to see what's going on. YouTube, you can find lists in the video description. If you have been here since the video went up, you may need to refresh. I added them after we went or got going for a few minutes. But both Tyranid lists are in the video description on YouTube. If you're on Twitch and would like to see the list, exclamation point list will get those for you.
Yeah. Some questions here about whether or not Kraken is the mirror breaker. I'm not 100% sure. There are certainly, there's positives and negatives to both sides in this particular matchup. Tyranid mirror matches tend to be extra interesting because of the interaction of synaptic imperatives. Because both imperatives activate at the start of each battle round, the players actually have to roll off to determine who's imperative, or who gets to choose their imperative first.
Right.
Which means that there is going to be sort of this open question at the beginning of each battle round, which imperative gets activated for each player. If one player opens with a Neurothrope imperative, for example, with the intention of using that to offensively deal damage with their Maliceptors, the other player may be then incentivized to use their own Neurothrope imperative defensively, since it also protects you from psychic powers. You can, for example, if you're trying to use the Warrior imperative to deal additional damage in melee, you could respond to that with the Zoanthrope imperative to give your entire army an invulnerable save. So that dynamic between these two armies is super cool and super interesting, and I think definitely makes the Tyranid mirror match a lot more interesting than we'd normally see. And I wouldn't say that I would give a significant advantage to either of these players, especially since Charlie Andre's list is not one that tends to fall into the trap of trying to take the midboard against the High Fleet Leviathan list, which is almost always going to go poorly for you since they deal so much damage concentrated to the center of the table. Charlie Andre's list can play around the edges of the table, can play the primary objective game better than Joel Wilson's list can, and I think also has some good profiles at killing Joel's big monsters. Those Raveners, for example, have a good profile at punching through the Maliceptor defensive abilities, since they don't care that much about the ranged attacks, so the -1 Strength Aura is not going to be that big of a deal, and they have a very high volume of attacks to get through the Maliceptor's invulnerable save.
So we do see a large flying monster fly across the table over those gaunts. I believe those are gaunts in the front corner of the deployment zone. Have to imagine they want to try and... He's going to roll 10 dice and try and drop some bombs on his gaunts before they can run out and start doing things. We see one big brainy boy out into... Oh, wait, we got to do it, Trevi. Into the glitch cam front and center.
Activate glitch cam. There he is. One Maliceptor taking the center of the table, and I think with a big advance roll there, it looks like we are going to be able to access the ruin there with some psychic overloads to start piling mortal wounds into that building. Now, we are on US Open layout 1 terrain here, or layout 2 terrain here, excuse me. So we do have these line of sight blocking ruins in the center. As you can see, we have transparent bases on those terrain features, which determines the outline of the terrain. So line of sight cannot be drawn through those entirely through those terrain features unless the attacker or defender is inside them. But for the larger terrain pieces, the three-dimensional elements have been ruled to be opaque. So we are going to ignore any windows or doors or other gaps inside those building walls that would normally allow line of sight to pass through. This means that one thing that Charlie has been doing to great effect throughout the entirety of this game, or of this event, is positioning his army very defensively and using the additional threat range that he has from playing High Fleet Kraken to allow him to project his threat range across the breadth of the table. The ball is in Joel Wilson's court here to engage into the Kraken army, because the Kraken army can pick the time of engagement if it wants to. And because that psychic overload is going to ignore line of sight, it is going to be able to drive into that building in order to start peeling casualties off of the Kraken army. Now, that said, we do see some good defensive positioning here with Charlie Andre positioning his Hormagaunts in the around the edges of that building to make charges and engagement into his more impactful units like Zoanthropes and Raveners a little difficult. Those guys should eat most of the Psychic Overload damage as well, as the Psychic Overload is going to trigger after the normal spell is resolved, and regular smites are not going to be able to pass through that building because they do require line of sight, but Tyranid-specific psychic powers like Psychic Scream or Neuroparasite will. So we can do a little bit of damage to those Hormigons with the standard psychic powers, but then that overload is also going to trigger and hit them before hitting any of the other units. Looks like we are putting Death Leaper in the center of the table there to add a little bit of objective secured. We saw Death Leaper absolutely instrumental in Joel Wilson's victory against Kyle Perry's Harlequins in the previous round. Death Leaper able to provide that objective security and additional model count for holding objectives to hold control of that center objective from the Harlequin aggression and maintain a primary objective lead while forcing the Harlequins into a central big morass in the middle that they really don't want to be doing against a High Fleet Leviathan army. I do also want to give a shout out to the Maliceptors here that Joel, the way that Joel has modeled his Maliceptors, he has different colored basing material on all of them in order to differentiate them. And we can see that, and we've been hearing every time he is referring to the Maliceptors, he's very clear with his opponents which color of Maliceptor he's talking about. So we did see a 90-degree angle taken there by the Harpy. It looks like the Harpy is going to be lining up a bomb onto the Hormigons, although I haven't seen the dice been rolled for that yet, so maybe we haven't resolved that. I would also, I could even see potentially just to stifle the movement into the middle, a Spore Mine drop alternatively to block a lot of the paths to move through the center. Because while those Spore Mines don't themselves block movement, their engagement range still exists. So you do, in the movement phase specifically, you do still have to move around them since you aren't allowed to enter the engagement range of enemy models unless you're charging them. The different basic material chat is actually the little bushes on their base. You can see it if we move to the glitch cam there. Looks like we have gotten some really big advance rolls on the left-hand side of the table between the Tyranid Warriors and one of the Carnifexes moving into that top left-hand objective for Joel Wilson, going to be able to hold that. That is sometimes something that gets a little bit dicey for Tyranids because unless you're playing something like Raveners or Gargoyles, which Joel is not, getting to that objective can be the luck of the dice sometimes. And if you roll a bunch of ones on your advance rolls, you actually aren't able to get there. Now, one thing, an additional terrain roll that we are using this weekend for the Motor City Mayhem is that in addition to those US Open Layout 2 terrain setups, the players are also, at the start of the game, able to position the 3D elements of their ruins however they see fit. So there is a modicum of player-placed terrain in addition in this terrain layout. And especially for an army like Joel, he has created an army that can make use of that, since oftentimes the units like Maliceptors and Carnifexes, without being able to make use of that breachable keyword, actually can't pass through the walls of those buildings and get stuck behind them. So as we can see, Joel has actually positioned the walls of that ruin on the left-hand side to allow him access at the front of the building, so those Carnifexes can loop their bases around and tow onto that objective, without having to deal with the wall in front of or behind them, meaning he can get good lines of sight on any enemy units that try to contest that objective, and while his Carnifexes are standing on it, they can be firing off of it without having to worry about those line of sight blocking walls stifling them. So it looks like Psychic Phase going through here. I believe we have a Catalyst down on the front Maliceptor. I don't know if any other psychic buffs have gone down. Players are being a little quiet here. I do want to thank everybody who's coming to join us for the Motor City Mayhem Finals. Thanks everyone who's stuck with us throughout the entirety of the weekend. We really appreciate all of the support we've gotten this weekend. Oh, no.